Cool. All right, so I'm Dipanjan Ghosh. I'm a premier field engineer / consultant. Now that's an internal name, but what I essentially do is do a lot of dev, a lot of stuff in PaaS, in fact IaaS as well. Look into how to move products from on-premises to online and Azure as well. So do a lot of architecture around on-premises as well as online and how to look at how to shift stuff to online. So that's kind of what I do essentially, a lot of dev stuff. Now moving on, I'm just going to quickly set up some expectations because EF Core is new, right? So a lot of people doesn't really, a lot of people actually think EF Core is still Entity Framework, the old Entity Framework that we still use. It's actually not old, it's something that we still actively work on. So in terms of this particular session, this is about Entity Framework Core, right? So what is this new thing? It's version 1.1 at the moment, so it's pretty new. And it's not about EF Entity Framework or EF 6.1 at the moment. So if you guys are really looking at EF 6.1, this is not the one. But if you actually have no idea what EF Core is or how to differentiate between those two and sort of draw some conclusions, then this is probably the right place. Because I'm going to obviously run some code, show you some new stuff, what's going on in there, talk a bit around the history, but also do some comparisons as well. So that you guys have a clear idea as to where each one sits. And if you're trying to spin up a new project now, what would you do? All right, so let's set up the agenda quickly. This is, I would be talking a bit around introduction of Entity Framework Core. I would be doing a bit of what's Core and what's EF 6.x. I'm going to do a bunch of demos, of course, and this is more around the demo. So we'll talk about different aspects of the demo. Then probably a couple of slides around EF 1.1, EF Core 1.1, and how it works and what are the new features in it. A bit more demos, and then I would be leading you to some of the documentations and GitHub, wherever you need to go to learn more about these things and even implement stuff if you need to. Because EF Core, I'm sure some of you guys already know, it's open source, right? So if you really want to contribute, you can, if you want to. All right, so by the way, I actually wrote in the beginning, it's Entity Framework. So if you're getting confused already about EF, that's Entity Framework. And it takes a long time to say it, so during the presentation, I would be saying EF, all right? So a bit of the naming history. Now, if you guys actually remember 2015 build, and in fact, 2015, almost the whole time, people were talking about Entity Framework everywhere. EF everywhere was kind of the buzzword. Everybody was talking about it. And that is the actual time when we started thinking about creating a framework which would be multi-platform and can be used by multiple tools. So that was the actual seed that started. So we started with Entity Framework, and we thought that it's going to be new. It's going to be something which is not Entity Framework, the original versions, which was 6. So we started with naming this. While we were doing this, we thought that, hey, it's actually pretty close to what we are doing with 6. So it shouldn't be called everywhere. It should be actually called Entity Framework 7. So beginning of 15, you would start seeing that there's a lot of branding happening about 7. People are doing and talking a lot of demos around 7. And by the time we confused a lot of people, we actually saw that when we were building the project, we saw that it actually is a lot different from 6, because 7 means that it's a kind of a progression to 6, which it was not. And I would be showing you guys why it is not. Then came Entity Framework Core. And that kind of sits pretty well, because if you guys know about .NET Core or ASP.NET Core, which is all about multiple platform, multiple tooling and stuff like that, this actually sits pretty well. So we kind of hold on to that, and that's what the product is. All right, Entity Framework Core is a lightweight, extensible, and cross-platform version of Entity Framework. And this is the goal, as I said, was right from 2014 onwards. We wanted to build something which can be used by multiple tool sets, and can be used in multiple platforms. And of course, lightweight and performance-oriented, right? So this was kind of our mantra on creating Entity Framework Core. Now, a bit of project status and how it's going so far. So when we started, Entity Framework is actually almost 10 years old. Actually, 8 years old in terms of releases, but it is 10 years because I think the first release candidate came almost 10 years back. So it's really, really mature tool, production ready, battle ready, stuff like that. So its journey actually started as Entity Framework 3.5 Service Pack 1, which is a really, really weird name to start with, right? But it started like that because it was hard coupled with .NET Framework, right? So when it actually launched, the tooling was in Visual Studio and and it was shipped with .NET Framework, right? Which was all right, but the only problem with this was that if there were bugs and there were things that we wanted to give it to you guys, it would be 2 years till the next .NET comes in. So that was the only problem. From 4 onwards and 5, what we did was it was still hard coupled with .NET, and the tooling was still in Visual Studio, but the latest updates were started to come in NuGet. So we could actually push in a lot of bugs, fixes, and all that stuff, and some functionalities, which was good. 6 onwards, we finally bit the bullet, and so the tooling is right now in Download Center, and the runtime actually is in NuGet, which is awesome. But it also means that when you actually download Visual Studio or .NET Framework, we actually chain the latest version to it. So you always get the latest version anyway, but you can separately download it. Entity Framework Core or EF Core pretty much works the same way. The other thing which is interesting is, of course, the new version came up, which is 6.2, and the one which is going to come is 2.0. Right now, it's 1.1. The interesting thing to see is that you guys see that there are 2 practically parallel tracks which is going on. So the product team is actually working on 2 parallel tracks at the moment, right? Over time, our goal is EF Core would take over Entity Framework, and it would be the choice for doing stuff. But it's absolutely not the case at the moment. In fact, we would be still building on Entity Framework 6.x, and we would still be doing fixes. We would still be coming up with minor versions. We would probably not come up with heavy new versions anymore with the Entity Framework, but it's still a live project and still going to go a long way. And over time, I would be talking about what's the base to choose and what to do. Now, when we talk about Entity Framework Core, what are the basic features or the basic underlying features that we actually worked on? First one is new platforms, right? Now, when we talk about platforms nowadays, this is kind of the poster that you see for the .NET ecosystem, right? So you see the .NET Framework, which is the erstwhile .NET Framework, and then the .NET Core, which is cross-platform, and then the mobility and mobile, which comes in with Xamarin, and the tooling is on your left. And then the .NET Standard sort of library that was set for different people to come and contribute, right? So this is what it is at the moment. Now, if I talk about Entity Framework 6, you would see that it practically dedicates itself to the .NET side of things, right? Which means that it does the WCFs, ASP.NET, Windows application, form-based applications, and so on and so forth, which is awesome. But if we talk about our journey, our goal, and the overall ecosystem, that doesn't really cut it. That's where Entity Framework Core lights up the whole system. Now, after showing this slide, I would obviously give my caveat, which is that this is the goal. But if you ask me, are everything production ready? It's not. Let's talk about Xamarin. We do have a .NET Framework. I don't know if you guys work with Xamarin at all, but if you do, you would see that there is a Entity Framework Core module there. You can actually start using it, do some POCs, and do some play around with, but it's not production ready yet. There's still some stuff that's been working on. It would get there, but it's not yet. Same with UWP. It works really well with dev stuff, and again, POCs and stuff, but if you actually run in release mode or production mode, it still doesn't work that well because UWP works on .NET Native, and EF Core also works on a lot of dynamic stuff, which doesn't gel together very well. But I know the teams are really working closely, and with the latest version of Native, most of the stuff would be actually solved. But as of now, yes, those two are still something as a goal, but it's not yet achieved. And it's new, right? It's just version 1. All right. The other fun bit was the new data stores, right? Probably 6, 7 years back, if you were creating an application, it would be eyes closed, getting a SQL as your backend. Doesn't really matter if you are doing a RDBMS or just bunch of disjointed tables, or it's just some data, some SQL, or some images, whatever. You would be using SQL as a backend. But that's not the case anymore. We have so many data sources nowadays. So you have DocumentDB, you have Mongo, you have blob storage, of course, you have table storage. So our backend has improved a lot. That's why it's absolutely imperative that the kind of the tooling that you need also should cater for all those kind of data sources. In fact, a lot of modern applications doesn't even care about SQL. You would be only using SQL if you really have to have things like foreign key and stuff like that, where it goes through the normal forms and it's really an RDBMS. Otherwise, you don't really need it, right? So I'll let this draw first. All right. So that's the goal. We are going to support relational and non-relational, which means that but if we support this, then how do we make it lightweight, right? So that's where the fun starts, where we are making everything as modular, which means that if you use certain kind of data store, you're only going to attach it. Otherwise, you don't really need to work with it. Not like Entity Framework, where there is 200 sort of drivers and devices already attached to it. Even if you're not working with Oracle or SQL, it would automatically be in your DLL. That's not how it would work. It's really lightweight. Only the drivers that you need, you can just attach it with the NuGet. So it's really, really modular. Now, example of providers at the moment, we don't have really many. There's around 15 at the moment. There are some third-party providers which are also coming in. Yeah, but as of now, it's around 15. If you compare with Entity Framework, it has almost 200. But yeah, it has most of the essential ones. Right now, it has SQL, of course. It has SQLite. As you see, Postgres, MySQL, SQL Compact. I know that Oracle is coming in as well. It would be a third party, but yeah, I think it's already there. So yeah, it's kind of getting built. In-memory is coming with 2. So if you are doing things like testing and stuff like that, you would be using in-memory. Azure Table Storage is still in the sort of prototype stage, but if you actually follow the GitHub, you would see that there is actually some work going on with that. Same with the Redis cache. So, by the way, when we talk about these things, and you would see that there are a lot of blogs come up with this cool stuff coming up with EF Core, and you would see that a lot of people are blogging about it, and they already actually announced that Azure Table Storage is in and stuff like that. Well, it's not. So if you are really excited, looking at the blog and want to really implement something in your code, just try to go and get to GitHub, really get through the documents to understand what's actually in there at the moment. Because 2014 end, November end, we actually moved the Azure Table Storage away from the production because we wanted to prioritize our builds and what should come first. And we know that the relational database should come first. So that's why it's still coming. All right? So for version 1 and version 1.1, which is right now, it's just relational. All right, new features. Now, I'm not going to go through all of them, but some of these features are not really something that we discovered or just came to our heads. These were requests which were lined up for months and years. We couldn't implement in EF Entity Framework because it was too hard to implement. Some of the stuff was, because there is so much of legacy code in there, and a lot of things are just built in there. It's like a big ball of spaghetti. So it was really, really hard to implement most of the stuff. And some of the stuff were really, really expensive. So some of these things would probably get to Entity Framework at one point in time, but some of this might not ever get there. But because this is new and we practically started from the scratch, we actually could implement all this right in place. So I would actually show you guys later on, demo around the memory optimized table, mapping of fields. But yeah, if you really want to look into all the features, again, I'll point you to the documentations where you need to go and have a look. lightweight and extensible, the things that I was talking about. So, and it's really imperative that we do this. I'm just going to draw the slides again. Really imperative we do this because remember we talk about multi-platform and multi-device, which means that if you are really using it with a Xamarin or a UWP, that means that it might be running in a device which doesn't, have RAM as a pretty premium, right? So it has to be very, very lightweight. And lightweight means that how do we cater for then different things? How do we do it? Is through making it modular, which means pay-per-play components. If you are really looking into foreign key and RDBMS and stuff like that, go ahead and use an extension of SQL, right? And if you're really looking into partition key and stuff like that, well, that means you are going towards stable storage. Just add that NuGet, and you're good to go. So really, the base components are very, very simple and lightweight, but everything else is modular, which is awesome. All right, now coming back to a bit of a comparison. Now, of course, EF Core is built from the same group of people who have been working with Entity Framework, and Entity Framework is really popular. There's a lot of things people actually really love in the Entity Framework, right? So we are really mindful of our past. We know that there are a lot of things that we absolutely love in there, like DB context and DB set. So in fact, when you get to Entity Framework Core and you start working with it, you would see that, hey, this namespaces, this classes looks exactly the same. But don't get fooled by it because a lot of methods are different. In fact, a lot of implementation are not even there in EF Core, right? So again, be cautious as to what you can do and what you can't in EF Core. But obviously not constrained by it because practically one day we just did a right click, add start new project and started with EF Core. So it was absolutely new, and so we could implement, think about architecture, go back to the drawing boards and do it again. So that's why we could do all this modular stuff. We could actually think about a lot around the performance and so on and so forth. And I would be actually quickly show you guys some demo around performance as well, which is cool. Now talking about what you guys would use, right? Now if you are really doing ASP.NET applications or any sort of applications at the moment, if you ask me, Entity Framework is still your guy, and it is going to be there for quite some time, right? As like any version 1, EF Core is pretty new. It started with the basic features. Now we are, don't get me wrong, we are getting new features in with 1.1. We actually put in a lot of bug fixes and a lot of features, but it's still not quite there, right? So if you're really doing a production level great stuff around now, EF6 is still probably going to be your right candidate. But if you're looking into doing something cross-platform, probably with ASP.NET Core or Entity Framework Core or .NET Core and stuff like that, that's where you probably would be looking at EF Core. But one thing you absolutely remember is that today if you get excited and want to go and rip off your Entity Framework and start implementing it with EF Core, chances that it won't work because a lot of implementations are still not there, even if the namespaces still look the same, right? So how I see this to work is basically think of EF Core as something that you would be porting to, not upgrading to, right? So that's what kind of I believe in as well. So how do you do porting and stuff like that? It's really simple. There are a bunch of documentations that we have written in GitHub as well as the Microsoft documentations. It's really easy to do. So think on those lines, right? And most of the time, in fact, EF Core and Entity Framework works side by side really, really well. And I would be actually showing you some demos where it kind of runs in the same class, which is not a good idea. But yeah, it runs pretty well. So use it as a port rather than implementing everything to it, not yet. All right, let's start with the first one. This one is kind of the basic 101. Before I start, how many of you guys have used Entity Framework before? A lot of. And about Core? Quite a few. Okay, cool. So this is perfect then. All right, so this one is 101. So two guys who have used EF Core before, this probably would be a bit rudimentary for you guys, but maybe check Facebook for next 2 minutes, or actually see this and see if everything is working fine. All right, so there are a few things that I'm going to quickly talk about. First thing first is, obviously there is a, that's your entities. It's just a normal class with a bunch of stuff. It's called blog. You have an ID, name, and URL. By the way, Entity Framework Core only supports code first, right? So most of the things, so that's why it's easier to demo this way. The other thing I would be talking about is db.database.ensure created. So that's something which we are providing in Entity Framework Core. So this one practically sees if there is a database exists, drops it, and creates again. Obviously, this is not something that you would be using in production, but this is pretty good for development. In production, you would be going either way, right? Either there would be a huge database which is already there and you would be generating entities from it, or you would be creating entities and then updating it to your databases. Now, we actually cater for both of them in Entity Framework Core, and that's called kind of migration. This is not the place where we can actually talk about migration, because it's a total different session altogether. But yeah, there are tools to do that in Entity Framework Core, which is good. All right, now if you really look at this, it's pretty similar to how Entity Framework works. You can add, you can delete, and do whatever, and then you can just do save changes, and it would commit it to your database. Now, and then what I'm doing is practically looping it and writing it back to the console. But the other thing I would kind of talk about here is this one, which is called onConfiguring. Now, if you see, I have something called option builder, which got parsed, and I'm passing something called .uSQL server. Now, if you really look into this, and you see this, so this actually means that it's an extension. Now, I can only see this because I've used the SQL Server extension. If I've been using something else, then this won't be there. So this is the kind of modular approach we have done, which is really nice. Even for SQL, it's all modular. You can bring SQL in, and if not, then use something else which you would need for your data. All right. Now I'm obviously pointing to a local DB, and now let's sort of try to run this. Let me see if that's the. Yep. It's pretty simple. I'm just running this. It would, put the entity in. Oops. All right. Now, one thing we really need to look at is, first of all right, I'll need to uncomment this, and I'll come back and talk about this later. Oops, sorry, it ran too fast. All right, so now I'll run it again, but before that, I need to quickly talk about a few things. One is, people who haven't played with Entity Framework much before, you can actually create attributes and talk about the constraints of your classes or your databases right here itself. So you can actually create attributes, and you can actually say that, hey, this needs to be 200 and whatnot. What you can also do is something called on-model creating, right? Where you can actually override the way your database should behave and the properties of your database. Now, I don't know if there is any DBA in the room. Sometimes they love their, things like TBL underscore and stuff like that. And if you really want to create your tables as TBL underscore, you can actually do it right here on model creating, right? So, and this is called Fluent API. So you can do it either through your through attributes, or you can actually use Fluent API. Now, I would actually talk about architecture a bit later, and I'll show you what we have done on model creating and why it is a bit more efficient now. Anyway, so let's run this again. And then if I close this and go back to SQL Server, you would see that name has changed to TBL, and the columns would have 200 varchar. So this is not something that that is unique to core, but there's things that we have done on model creating that I'm going to talk about in the next few slides. All right, let's get to the next one, and the next one would be actually really nice. It's around performance improvements. Now, the kind of stuff that I'm doing, I did not really handpick the ones which actually works better and which did not. I'm really talking about really basic stuff around get and posts and stuff like that. So so it works. It actually really works well. Having said that, again, there is a caveat, which means that there are still certain places where EF works better than Entity Framework Core. So tonight, if you go back and work with it and see if, hey, this thing actually EF works better with Entity than EF Core, just log a bug with in the GitHub, and we are actually looking at it. In fact, we are very fortunate that a lot of people are posting their findings and stuff like that. That makes our life a bit more easy, and we actually work with them to remove those roadblocks. So we are still working on some of the performances, but in most cases, you would see that it actually is quite well, significant. Now, in this case, what I'll also do is switch on the profiler to just kind of have a look into how it's kind of getting triggered in SQL as well. Just for a kick. Now I'll just run this first to clean up the databases. Oops, sorry. All right, so I'm just ran something to clean up the databases and probably recreate it. Now let's actually look into one of the by complex query, I mean that it's basically a link query. By the way, when you are using Entity Framework Core, if you really hit bugs, you would actually hit bugs with link, because this is by far we are trying to create as much or write as much SQL as possible with link. So we are actually implementing a lot of stuff in there. So if you actually hit bugs, that would be probably the first place you would hit bugs in. Though having said that, most of the day-to-day scenarios are all kind of works fine. Anyway, so this is a query which does a bit of join, order by, and then skips, and then does a group by and stuff like that. And if you really look into both of them, it's actually similar code, right? It's not similar, it is the same code. But if you hover around the stuff, you would see that namespaces are different, right? But that's why it's sometimes what I'm doing is I'm writing exactly the same code but with different namespaces in the same file. That's probably not the right way of doing it. You would do it in different classes at least, because otherwise with the naming you would get confused, right? All right, so let's run this first. And what I did was I also switched on the profiler. Now what I'll do is I'll clean it up. So it starts with a clean slate. Run this. And you would actually see that there is kind of significant improvements. All right, now I'm just going to run this again, and I want to talk about a few things in this. Before I do that, I'll actually quickly show you guys how it actually looks in there. So this is the one which was done by Entity Framework, right? So So this is the SQL which it actually wrote in SQL and triggered the query. Oops. Yeah, so this is the one. And this is what Entity Framework Core wrote, right? So no wonder why the performance was better, right? So EF Core actually writes better SQL. Whatever. Yeah, this is massively ugly. All right. All right, get is good, but let's do a bit of a save. And why I say it's optimized is because I actually tried to optimize this particular function as close as possible, right? So you actually, instead of looping it through, you actually put it in an array and then pass it together. That's the one thing you do. And in this case, I can exactly do the same things, but I didn't. We'll see which one still works better. All right, so run this. Now also remember that this is a local DB that is in my solid state right in my computer. Just think about this, right? When you're actually talking to a server or maybe SQL Server in Azure and stuff like that, this kind of things exponentially grows, right? So just look at the differences. It's massive. Now you would see that in different iterations, Entity Framework Core actually reduces more. The thing that works behind the scenes is something called batch. Now, something that Entity Framework still does is something called caching, which means that Entity Framework and Entity Framework Core both does something called caching, which means that if you guys know SQL, if a query hits SQL again and again, it does a sort of tuning and profiling of that query so that it can run fast. Caching exactly the same thing that's done on the memory on Entity Framework side. So if the same link is kind of keep generating, it kind of does sort of a profiling in the memory itself so that it runs better. But what's happening here is EF Core actually does batch when it tries to commit stuff in the database, which means that I was doing 1,000 updates. It probably won't batch 1,000 together, probably do 100 at a time, which means just 10 inserts. And EF is doing 1,000 inserts. So that's caused a massive difference, right? So those are the things that we try to make better and those are real architectural changes that happen with Entity Framework Core. All right. The next one I would be talking about, remember I talked about how we have changed some sort of architecture to do sort of the conventions better. Now before I actually go and do the demo around the building pipeline, which exactly what we did around talking about conventions and stuff like that, I just wanted to quickly show you guys how the architecture has changed a bit. Now this is Entity Framework, right? Right now it's Entity Framework 6.1, and it's only going to grow. So what happens behind the scenes in Entity Framework, right? You have entity classes. What EF does, it kind of goes and sniffs and checks how you've defined your entity classes, and it knows, okay, so this might be your foreign key, this might be your, this might be your primary key and stuff like that, and it kind of creates a bunch of conventions. Then what we do is then you guys write your DB set properties, right? And then we actually see, so what are the real instances that you've created of your entity? So once we do that, we then, obviously EF does the DB set discovery, and then you guys do on model creating, and that you probably enhance it a bit more, you change stuff and all that, change table names and all that stuff. And that becomes the configuration for us. And then finally we create the model, right? So this was good, but there is a fundamental problem in this, which is that if today I want to actually loop inside my own model creating and want to use different algorithms for my entity to say, set up the primary keys for different entities, the model is not there. So if I really have to loop it, we have to generate an API so that you can do it, and then kind of store it intermittently in configuration, so that once the actual model gets created, sort of map it, which is not the best way of doing things. That's where the performance gets hit. So what we did in core was we do the same things with convention, so that happens. Again, you guys write your DB sets. We understand, we discover it. And what we do is we actually create your model right then. So what happens is you have the top-level APIs to do the normal stuff that you do, but if you really want to do sort of the low-level work or looping around your model, you can actually do that right then. So once you do that, then we actually pass that model to on-model creating. So if you really want to do some fun stuff with the model itself, do some looping and all that, you can do that now. And performance-wise, it would be really good. All right? So I just want to quickly show you a demo on that. Let's get back to Visual Studio. Start conventions. All right. The code is very similar. Again, blog and posts. So if you have blog, and then there's a collection of posts inside the blog, so which means that it creates a foreign key as it gets generated, and so on and so forth. Right? And you would see that I've created a bunch of stuff in on-model creating. Now let's actually run this first. I would drop the table and create it again. And when we created, these kind of things would happen. Let's run this. Oops, I'm looking at the wrong project. That's what. All right. Let's try this one more time. Now, as it runs, there's really nothing much to see here, but as it runs, I'll just quickly run through what it's actually doing. Now, one of the stuff that we already saw a glimpse of is that you can obviously change your names and stuff like that if you need to. The other thing which we are doing now is you are actually looping through all your entities right there, because you have the handle to entities now, because you have the model, which is awesome. And then you can do a lot of things. So you can actually set the max length right there and say 200 or whatever you need. And the other thing is, because the model is already created, I can, by type itself, I can create and generate the names, like the foreign key names. If you want to change it, or if you have a specific convention to follow, you can do it right there. So you don't really hard code your names. You can actually play with the types right there, because the model is already existing. So what we did is we created a foreign key saying fk dot whatever your relation name is, and I want this all lowercase because my DBA wants it that way. There's no DBA in the room? Oh, all right. Okay, cool. All right, so if we go and check the, let's refresh this. Conventions here. Of course, the names got changed to DBL. And if you look into the keys would be in this one. You see that it's all lowercase and stuff like that. Now, it's not that you would be always using this, but if you really need to, you have a lot of power to play with the lower, low-level stuff in here, which is awesome. And also, the one other thing that's done here is that, you're not going to set string values for everything. So here you can actually use a bit of link to really make it short to say that, okay, if it's only string properties, I'm going to do 200. Now, you can use, just think of this, you can use a lot of logic to play with a lot of columns in there, right? All right, so now the next one is practically what everyone wants to look at is one sort of portable code and using it with an app as well as a classic .NET application, right? That's what cross-platform means, right? So let's actually look into that. So in this case, I have two applications. One is UWP, which is an app, and one is just a form-based application, .NET. And this is basically the portable library that I would be using with both of them. All right. So there's just practically one library that's used in multiple ways. Now, if you look into it, this is basically a notes app, which means that it's you can just take notes, much like a scenario like this, or when you're in a class or something like that, where you want to quickly take notes and save. So this is a demo like that. What I'm using is SQLite. Can anybody tell me why I'm using SQLite here? Because it's an UWP, right? So UWP is a mobile app. And in that case, we can't really use something like a SQL or any sort of heavy provider. SQLite is your choice in this case. So one good thing about using SQLite is the connection string is really easy to write, right? So this is your connection string for SQLite, and I'm using this. Why? Because I'm going to use it for both my app as well as a application. Now let's run this. Now one thing I would show you guys here, because remember I talked about the caveat where I actually mentioned that UWP is something that's still not 100% gels well or marries well with .NET Entity Framework Core. That's because it runs in native, and we do a lot of generics and a lot of other variables which doesn't really work yet. But I know that the team is working closely with the native team, and it's going to get better. So what I'm doing now is I'm actually running in the debug mode, if you see this here. Can you guys see that? All right. Why I do that is because if you actually put it to release, you would, first of all, you would see that it takes a long time to build. In minutes, actually, it takes minutes to build, and sometimes it would actually crash. That's just got exactly the things that I'm talking about, that the native still doesn't work well. But it's good for demos and POCs. But hopefully, as soon as the native comes out, it would get better. So quickly looking into the code. It's really, really simple. I'm doing the ensure created right there. And in terms of, not the main page, but the new node, you would see that I'm just writing it back to the database, right? And with if you remember with SQLite, what happens is, because it's an app, it would actually go and save it back to your wherever your runtime is, right? So, and I wouldn't be knowing that from before. Wherever the app runs in your mobile or wherever, that it would send it in its app cache. All right. So when I run this now, it actually ran fine, which is cool. So test, I would save it, and when I go back to my node, it works. So EF Core actually works with UWP, which is awesome. All right, now, as I said, I'm going to use the same library to work with a normal classic application, which we all know. Now, how many people here actually day-to-day work with latest toys like Xamarin and UWP and stuff like that? Just 1 and 2. All right. So this is probably for rest of us, right? Normal form-based application. I'm just waiting for this kind of things to be cool again, like any other old stuff. All right. So if I run this now, I'll quickly show show you the code. Here, actually it should be here. So it's practically the same thing. I'm practically using the same library and stuff like that. So if I run this, now there's some, the power of EF Core, I will be talking after talking about this after I write this. Now if I, classic, so no surprise, it works. And if you know how SQLite works, it actually goes and sits in your, I think it sits, yep, so it would actually sit in your, it runs in debug, so it actually sits in your bin, and that's your DB. So that's where it sits, right? But if I'm really looking into the classic or this kind of legacy applications, I might not want to use SQLite. I want to use something like a SQL Server. That's where I want to retain it because it can do a lot more. Having said that, I can't use the sort of same library to use both because UWP doesn't work with any other SQL. In fact, that's another thing that we are working with SQL guys at the moment. The EF guys are working with them to sort of look at ways of how we can actually talk to the big boys like the big SQL and Oracle from the apps. That would be really nice. So what do we do? So that's where EF Core actually does a real nice trick. So if you go back here, what I did here is that not only can you do on configurations in the class, you can actually import configurations as well, which is awesome. So if somebody can actually do a different other sort of options, I can actually pass it to my core, to my entity framework core, and it would then behave with that particular option. So that's why you would see that I was playing safe. That's why I said that because this would anyway run, because if there are further configurations to do, this would always get fired. So that's why there's this condition that, hey, if there is no configurations, then please run this, right? So I'm not going to run this because I haven't configured the SQL in the backend, but it's just to show you how powerful this is. Now, if you go back to the main from CS, you see that you can actually pass the get the builder option and then configure your SQL and then pass it back to your class, which means that in that case it won't really worry about SQLite. It would be talking to the SQL Server. So that's the way you can act. So that's basically the other thing that so same model, multiple platforms, which was the first one, and the next one was practically same model but multiple databases, which you can do. All right. Now let's get to Entity Framework Core. So this was released November 2016, end of November 2016, but it did not release with a lot of new features and all that stuff. As I said, it was more around removing a lot of roadblocks, removing a lot of bugs. So if you actually go and see the release, heaps of bugs that was actually got removed after this was. As any version 1, obviously as soon as it went to the market, there were a lot of things that it wasn't doing. So there's a whole heap of bug fixing that was there. So there's not a lot of new features that came up. So these are some of the things that is now there with Entity Framework Core. Now some of the things that I absolutely would mention is mapping to fields, which was awesome because if you remember Entity Framework, it absolutely needs you to create getter and setter in your entity frameworks. All your entities needs to have a getter and setter. If you don't have a setter or a getter, it doesn't count it as a column, right? So those got changed, and these are really some of the things that we really wanted that to happen. And obviously, because Entity Framework Core is new, we could do it. And I would be also talking about SQL memory optimization table, which came with 2014, SQL 2014. And you can now implement that with EF Core. Connection resiliency is something which is really awesome because Nowadays, we do cloud. You would be talking more and more with SQL databases in Azure, also SQL boxes in Azure and stuff like that. Now, we have actually inbuilt properties created specifically for SQL databases in Azure, where it inherently knows what kind of resilience it needs to talk to, because it knows that it's going through the network. There might be, how many times you need to, check for connections, and how many times you need to pool and stuff like that, which is awesome. So that kind of comes out of the box with it. Now, begin work with some of these features, but it's probably not going to be shipped with even 2.0. But these are coming. If you actually look into GitHub, go and look into GitHub, you would see that there's a lot of pull requests coming in now. So these are actively worked on at the moment. And that's actually fun working with open source, right? You can actually go and check what's going on. And if you guys are interested, you can submit your own request and ask for, you can contribute there as well. Some of the things here would be Visual Studio Wizard for reverse engineering. Now, this is the monitoring or the migration stuff that I talked about, where you can actually pull entities from your databases which is existing, or update them through your entities. Now, these are all there, but it's actually in command prompt. So we are trying to create some sort of a wizard, wizardy thing in Visual Studio. So that's going to come soon. The other one which I'm really interested in is Azure Search support. That would be awesome. In fact, I just saw a demo last week with Azure Search support, where it was, but it's a lot of smoke and mirrors still in there. But when the actual implementation happens, because I haven't seen it even got a pull into the main code base yet. So there's actually nothing still inside the code base to build, but they are doing a lot of prototypes in it. So what happens now is that in Link, you can actually, how many people actually know about Azure Search, by the way? Not many. So what Azure Search is an indexing mechanism for all your data sources. It can be your SQL, it can be table, it can be exe that you ran. You can import it, and then you can do some indexing. And it's really good. It's actually a forked version of Elasticsearch, right? And this kind of fits, because remember, now you have multiple data sources. Now SQL is not the only one, right? You have SQL, you have blobs where you keep your files, and then you have table storage where you keep your entities and stuff like that. And if you want to really search those data, how would you do it? That's where Azure Search kind of comes in, right? So once that comes into EF Core, what would happen is you can actually write in the link itself, where you can actually say search, Azure Search, and then you can search through the link itself, and it would give you much more better response to those kind of things. All right, moving on. I'm just going to do a couple of demos on EF 1.1. These are really nice ones. One is obviously the mapping of fields, which people were waiting for a long time. So if you quickly look into this, field mapping. All right, now let's get to the code. Now, this is, you guys would see that there's some real magic in here. Now, in here, if you see, I have a blog ID and a blog name. I practically have no property at all for URL. I just have a get URL function, and I have a set URL, but which does a lot of, before it's set, it does a lot of checks, right? It actually goes and pings the URL and see if it's a valid URL, and then it does it, which is good. That's what you want, right? However, if you run this in normal EF scenario, the table which would form with the columns, it won't have the URL at all, because there is no property with getter and setter. Now, what you can do with Entity Framework Core is, again, on model creating, you can say, well, I have a property which is conceptually a string and whose name is URL, but it doesn't have a property. It has something called hasField, and you can point it to the underscore URL, which is awesome. And also, you see that you can actually mention the column name, because you don't want an ugly column come up which is called underscore URL, your DBA would probably kill you, right? So, here you can actually mention the right sort of name, and you can do that. Now, I actually kept this because I wanted to show you guys that there is actually access mode that you can also mention, which I won't be doing. But if you see, there is enum of field, so always take field, and there is a field during construction, which means that take field only around the time when you're getting it, but when you're setting and all that stuff, use property otherwise, and or set properties. Now, if I do set properties and then I do field, EF core would generate an exception saying that, hey, I can't honor your request because you don't have a property here, right? All right, so yes, now you can actually directly talk to the field, and then you can actually do a lot of methods and do a lot of validations right in your code itself, which is cool. So now if I run this, all right, and if I go back to the server and look into the map fields, I'll just do a refresh. You will see that URL has popped up pretty nicely. So you can actually do a lot of stuff. It gives you a lot of power. And not just, I have absolutely no properties at all. But in some cases, even if you have just a setter or a getter, even that doesn't work with normal entry framework, which is, in this kind of scenarios, it's a godsend. All right, so the last one for the day would be around the memory optimized tables. Now, again, with SQL 2014 and 16, of course, we have memory optimized tables, and EF couldn't support it, right? Now we can. With Entry Framework Core, you can actually do a lot of memory optimized table queries. Now, how does that work, and how this demo is kind of played out? What I did was I actually spawned out a bunch of threads. This is something like the example kind of looks like an IoT sort of scenario where you have a bunch of sensors and devices, which I've spawned up multiple threads, which is basically bombarding your table. And I have just one more thread which practically goes and sniffs out and monitors the database to give us the eyes and ears of what's going on. The other thing to look at is yeah, so this is kind of what's the average request that I would see. Now, before I run this, the small caveat is that I've seen this run and I've seen the performance improve massively, but it also depends on how many core you run on. So this would actually get limited by the 2 physical core that I have. So it won't probably be as good, but it would still show you that there are, you would still see some performance improvements. The other thing to really look at is I'm not running a local DB in this case. I'm actually running a SQL 2016 box up in Azure to this particular demo. So this would be actually a good test of the bandwidth and see how it works. Because I would be bombarding with a lot of, it would be really front-heavy table writing. There's a lot of writing going on there, and then I would be querying a lot from the bottom of the table. So hopefully it all works. All right, now let's run this. The other thing that I wanted to say was that SQL Azure actually supports memory optimized tables. However, it's still not rolled out to all the tiers of it. Right now, it supports only in premium. But I know that very, very soon it's going to support the standard and the basic ones as well. Yeah, just so you guys know. So let's see how it works. It all depends on the network because it's in Melbourne data center. Sorry? Oh, sorry. I've probably done a... Oh, I'm running a wrong application, sorry. Wrong project. What's going on? All right. Yeah, dropping actually ran really fast, with SQL in Azure, which is good. Now we are creating the database. Obviously, it's going to take time, and then we'll see how the performance goes. The first one I'm running is just a minute. Just wanted to quickly check if I've switched on the memory. It's gone really, really slow. So if you really look into this, come on. If you really look into the update, monitoring database, and this is where you're creating it. Yeah, fake sensor reads. It's really, really slow. Anyway, let's run this. All right. Now, if you see that, well, it started with around 26, 20, but it actually went really well. It reached around 40, 51, 47, 49. Well, it would plateau, obviously, with what my core is. It's just 2 physical cores. But you would see that the massive amount of increase right from the beginning. Now, if I run it without running it specifically for optimized tables, you would see that there would be a difference, though not much because of my machine, but it would still see there's a bunch of difference there. Yeah, we see now it's started working. Oh, actually, I ran it without it. All right, that's cool. So it was the top one actually reached around 49 to 50, right? So that's where it kind of plateaued. All right, cool. Now let's run it again. Initially, it starts a bit slow, and then it warms up, then it goes up, and then it starts getting plateaued, depending on how your hardware is. So again, it's dropping, it's creating. Because of the bandwidth and everything else, and because of no dedicated lines, yeah, I've thrown as many challenges as possible to this this particular stuff. But at the beginning itself, we would see that it started around 20-ish. It started really well. It would, after around 3 or 4 clicks, it starts improving a bit more. Oh, it's actually went down. It's probably the bandwidth. But let's see. That's really, really weird. Yeah, I think they're throttling the bandwidth or something like that. But it's actually actually reducing. Yeah, this is funny. Usually you would see around 20 to 30% jump, depending on two cores. But here it actually went opposite. It looks like there's some sort of throttling going on somewhere, which is really weird. Well, hopefully if it ran enough times, either they would stop my bandwidth altogether, or it would improve. Anyway, yeah, it's really weird that it's going down. It's probably because of the throttling, but with this kind of this particular thing is memory optimized on, it usually works really well with multi-core scenarios. Hey, it started going up again. Okay, so looks like there was a lull in there. Anyway, all right. Before we finish this off, just want to quickly talk about the next steps, which is where you can actually go and read a lot about that. One thing we are trying to do really well in Microsoft is make the MSDN cool again. So I practically talk about this everywhere in terms of Azure. Even if you want to learn things about Azure, get to MSDN first. It's really, really nice nowadays. Search a topic, you would see the context on the left. You can practically start with the overview, and you can actually go through the whole thing with demos and all that stuff. It's really, really nice way of learning. So do that, docs.efprojects.net. GitHub is where EF core resides. It's practically all there. In fact, our documentation is also right there. So if you just do Entity Framework /docs, that's where all the documentation resides as well. So it's all there. So if you guys are interested, go play with it. If you guys are interested to really contribute, you can do that as well. All right. Before I finish, obviously, there's something that I really need to tell you guys, which is learning path of Ignite. These are the places that you go and learn some stuff. Obviously, eval. Really important that you guys do eval. And if you can, if you're doing eval, obviously, you get a chance to be the pilot of the drone or whatever. But yeah, no, we really like to see feedback so that we can do things better. We actually look into it. All right, with that, thank you very much. Thanks for hanging out with me. Thanks.